Hello, welcome back to another episode of Compass Friday. Today I'm here with Douglas, who is a psychotherapist, and we're going to discuss how to practice gratitude in our daily reflection or daily reflection process.
Yeah, as Kim said, I am a psychotherapist, or another word for mental health counselor, and I was trained in the United States and have been practicing for about 25 years, the last 10 of which have been in Vietnam, mostly in Hanoi, but more recently, for the last 3 years, I've been living in Hoian. So
You've been here for, I would say, more than a decade in Vietnam.
yes, more than a decade. That's right.
Yeah, it's a third of my life, almost.
Well, it's not a third of mine. It's maybe like something else,
Yeah,
But it's a long time. Yeah, very quickly it turns into a significant amount of my life. Yeah.
We have two New Year holiday, the International New Year holiday and the Lunar New Year holiday that is coming.
Yes.
And this is the time that a lot of Vietnamese find a perfect occasion for us to, because it's the longest holiday, to really sit with ourselves and look back at the journey that we've been through during the past year. So basically review and reflect on what we have been through, right? Usually during that reflection process, a lot of emotions come up. We may feel very proud of ourselves for achieving something important. We feel relieved that we have overcome something difficult, or sometimes we may feel shame or guilt that we haven't been able to do what we wish for, or even regret. And I've observed that the more we grow up, and not just physically, the aging, but the more mature we get, the more sense of gratitude we feel during this reflection process.
Well, it's interesting that you're saying that comes with maturity.
Yeah.
I think probably it does. I know that for myself, I have become much more appreciative of the positive aspects of life, but I'm not sure everyone does. I do think there's some grumpy old people that can never think of anything to be very thankful for because they're too busy complaining,
Yeah, it's true. But I do believe that a majority of the people who are going to view this video are people who find appreciation for their life in this moment. Yeah, and you mentioned appreciation, right? I feel that there's a distinction between appreciation and gratitude. Appreciation for me is a cognitive process where you acknowledge perceived value of something or someone. And gratitude is more affective. It's a feeling, I think. So it's a part of the appreciation, but it's the emotional aspect of it.
I think they're very similar, and we might even think of them as synonyms in some ways, but I do think there is a subtle difference, and that is that gratitude, for me, it's a bit more of the acting out of my appreciation, it's showing gratitude, or it's using language around that, being thankful.
When I think about, let's say, my exchange semester in South Korea was enabled by my university. When I think about it, I feel like I appreciate my university for enabling that opportunity, but I don't feel gratitude because they made the process very painful. It's very bureaucratic. Yeah,
that's a good distinction too.
Yeah, but they made it anyway, so still I appreciate them for the opportunity.
There,
but I don't feel grateful.
You don't feel like you want to express that gratefulness, or
there's just no emotion about gratitude. I just don't feel, because there's so much pain and frustration during the process of preparing for that trip. I don't feel like I'm grateful for the work that they did, particularly in that part.
So they gave you something, but they made it difficult for you to receive it.
Yeah, so basically when we review or reflect upon the journey that we've been through over the year, I found that this sense of gratitude is very helpful, because we may have a lot of positive or negative emotions when we review this journey, but the more gratefulness we can have for the experience we've been through, the more value we can distill or can perceive from that experience. And the more value we can perceive, there would be more satisfaction and more meaning we would feel about our own life.
It's a very powerful recognition, because we're too often attracted or distracted by the things that are difficult, the frustration, the fear, the anger, the ways in which life generates emotions that we wouldn't want. And it seems like if we're not actively attending to those things that we can appreciate, then undesirable feelings can dominate. We can easily find ourselves affected by what is difficult and missing out on things that are actually fantastic aspects of life. So holding something in a context that's bigger. Okay, just remembering that there's something here that we can learn or we can understand that has value.
And that is very important, because as you said, cultivating gratitude doesn't just help us to momentarily feel good about life, but that feeling actually has a bigger impact as it generates more encouragement that help us become even more courageous in our daily actions or in our pursuits. It doesn't stop at just making us happier in that moment. The feeling come and go, right? But what they is it helps us to develop this mentality. Actually, I would say resilience, right, against adversity, and help us to be more courageous, taking actions in pursuing our goals in a more bolder attitude.
I want to hear more about that. Courage, being bold. So say more about how feeling better, feeling appreciative of life, then also leads us to become maybe bigger risk takers, or being willing to try something, being stronger in the way that we do it. How do you think those are connected? What do you think?
I think this is related to positive reinforcement, right? When we are able to perceive values from even difficult situations or painful experience, and we recognize or develop a sense of gratitude for what we have learned or the meaning that we have taken from that experience, then we are able to distill the qualities that we've developed or the wisdom that we have gained through that experience. And these qualities or wisdom will assist us in our future journey, right? And enrich our intelligence or our strength in dealing with future adversity. And we have to be able to recognize that value. Because if we're in a place of feeling very frustrated or you only see the pain, then our tendency is to avoid pain, right? And I think that's very reasonable, a reasonable tendency, right?
Yeah.
So if we only see the pain, the frustration, or the negative emotion, tend to avoid risk, avoid adversity, and avoiding is not solving or not overcoming. So that means our resilience or our strength is shrinking instead of expanding or building up. That's why I said positive reinforcement, because we recognize ourselves for the small things that we did or the experience that seemed trivial to someone else but meaningful to us. Then we build this strength, and eventually we are able to take bigger risks or make bigger decisions or make bigger changes in life. So, yeah.
A couple of key ideas there that strike me. Number one has to do with avoidance. And of course, we would rather avoid pain than go through it. But if we're avoiding pain, and usually it doesn't go away, somehow or another, we are better off if we face it, if we experience the feelings, and feelings are fluid, so we can move through them. But certainly it helps when we already have cultivated and embraced and realized how important it is to be appreciative, to see that life has a lot to it. It means we can then face things rather than avoid them.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. What comes with it is this ability to rise above it, to realize I can be okay. We can call that resilience. It's how we overcome hardship. Or we can also just think of it as being actualizing ourselves, okay? Actualizing what's our possibility, our potential.
Yeah.
What I think here is that you're really putting a lot of emphasis on something that really needs to be highlighted, which is that there's so much in life to appreciate and be thankful for, and to recognize that if we don't open up ourselves to what that is, we're really limiting the ways in which we go about functioning. What happens then is we get caught in the feelings of fear and frustration and guilt, and even the idea that I have to accomplish something, I have to make myself do what I should, which is very different than growing into a life that's being fueled by cultivating our appreciation.
Yeah. I like the way you say that. Cultivating a sense of gratitude helps us to embrace life, see what's more of us that's possible, right? And embrace all the amazement that life has to offer, and that's actually beautiful. Yeah. I also want to discussing about some of the myths that we often have around practicing gratitude. At this point, we understand how important it is to cultivate a sense of gratitude, but what is it actually, right? So when you say that developing this sense of gratitude helps us to realize how much life has to offer, it relates to one of the things we tend to think about when we practice gratitude is to point it outward, right? Because gratitude is the feeling or the emotions of gratefulness. And as Vietnamese people, or I think many people in general, we are taught to be grateful for others, or to be grateful for basically an external source or an external contributor to the value that we perceive. So if I'm successful, I'll be grateful for my parents, for my colleagues, for my teachers, right? I've never seen anyone who won an Oscar and be like, I'm grateful for myself for working hard or for overcoming all of my difficulties and such. What I'm trying to say is we always point our gratitude outward, and we miss out on the very contributor to the value we perceive or the success that we achieve, that is ourselves.
Wow. Such a powerful realization. Because while certainly we can be appreciative for all of those people, if we exclude ourselves, a violation. Because in the end, we're the one who
actually
did it.
the action.
That's right. So I don't think it's an either or. I think we can certainly be appreciative of all of those people who helped us along the way. But I think to actually bear responsibility is to take ownership of our own accomplishments, our own struggles, the ways in which we have an appreciation for ourselves, for how hard life is and how we've been overcoming difficult things. And I would call that a healthy pride.
Yes.
Okay? Not an arrogant pride,
yes.
but pride that includes humility. Okay? It includes not being better than someone else, but not being less either.
That's true.
Not diminishing our place. So I think this is a very important thing. It's hard for people to feel what I call an appropriate confidence in ourselves, the right to have a life that's ours, and to feel good about what we're doing, even when it's so imperfect and so flawed. But to say, I'm okay, I'm good enough. I think that appreciation, it should definitely include ourselves, as you're saying.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought that up, because we have a collective culture where our culture focuses on the community, not the self. We are encouraged to achieve a lot, but we're not encouraged to recognize ourselves for those achievements. As a good person, we should all think that we're lucky, and that not because of our parents or our schools or our friends, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. And part of that is true, but as you said, at the end of the day, we're the one who own the action. So we should be the one who own the result or the experience, right?
For me, the deepest level of that is when we separate our value from our behavior. And so it's a confidence, not because I've done good things or I've performed very well. It's a confidence that comes from a realization that we all have our place in the world, that in our essence, we're already acceptable. But very young, early age in life, we get taught, your value is connected to your performance or your image of yourself. And so somewhere in that, we lose a stronger connection of self-acceptance for the essence of who we are, the core of who we are. I think this is, self-acceptance. Often it comes through self-approval. Okay.
Yeah.
First we approve and then we accept ourselves. Often we can't get that approval. Okay. Maybe we don't get it from others and therefore we don't give it to ourselves. But at some point, especially in the adult world, that's up to us. Okay. We can't wait around for somebody to say, I approve of you, because
he's going to say that.
Well, they might, but even then it's never enough.
Yeah.
We have to be able to say, I'm okay, I'm good enough. And then we accept ourselves as we are. And two things come from it. Number one, we could say that there's a kind of healthy love. And I can love myself and I can love the life I have. Okay? And the other thing is that we feel empowered. Okay, empowered to say, I can do things. It's like you said before, is how we get courage and bold and willing to take risks and to go about life in a way that says, this is my life to live.
Being able to acknowledge ourselves and hope for ourselves is already very close to self-acceptance, because it basically involves self-approval, right? And I think another thing that is also important that you said earlier is this doesn't have to be in reference to anybody else, right?
Yeah.
This is an introspective reflection. I ran out of book here, but basically this is an inward recognition or an inward sense of gratefulness toward ourselves. It doesn't have to be because we did it better than somebody else.
No.
It doesn't have to also involve public applause.
No.
Maybe we can even develop this sense of gratitude from the experience that seems very trivial to others but very meaningful to ourselves. This is very important too, because I know many people base their self-recognition on the final outcome of something.
Nice.
But with the mentality of introspective, it doesn't have to be a final outcome. It can be the tiniest progress that we make.
Well, what you're saying again is so important, because nobody knows the particular challenges of the journey you've lived. Nobody knows when you've been strong and courageous or accomplished something you never thought you could do. Nobody knows how hard things were and what it took for you to get to the place where you were okay again. Yeah. Nobody knows those things. And so nobody can then really validate what's most true for you. If we can't do that for ourselves, then we are self-limiting. Okay? When we can do that, we are self-empowered. The way that we live is that we reflect on and we reconcile and we understand and we feel good about the persons that we are. That doesn't mean that we don't have regrets or we don't make mistakes and do things wrong. But in the bigger scheme of life, that we learn from those things and we continue to appreciate.
Yeah, I like the way you say that we reflect and then we reconcile, because that's an important step, right? After we reconcile, only after that we are able to distill the lesson from the experience, or we are able to perceive the value from that experience. Because if we only look at the experience, if I only look at the process I went through with the administration of my school to enable my semester exchange, even though it's so many years ago already, the fact is it was painful and very bureaucratic. But if I was able to shift my perspective beyond the mere experience and be able to the value from that, I would be able to see that I had the determination or the commitment to pursue that goal to go abroad and study in another country. And from there, I was able to forge a strength I didn't know I had to go through that administrative process, because I assumed that I was a very bad person when it comes to paperwork. Yeah.
You found your way. You overcame the obstacles. You maintained your emotional balance so that you, instead of getting upset or quitting or being so angry and frustrated that it had consequences, you somehow find the strength and the tenacity to keep going and to find your way. And now, reflecting on it, you can see it from a distance and even appreciate yourself that you accomplished something under those conditions. Maybe you didn't think that you could,
I think this is also true for some people that I know, the stories that they've been through. Maybe they have a very bad employment in a culture that they would call unhealthy, for example. And of course, it's painful for them. But when they're able to look back, not just only at the experience, but the lesson or the value that they gain through that experience, the qualities that they gain through that experience, then the pain or the frustration, even resentment, shifted or transformed into this kind of acceptance. Like, I don't resent that anymore, but I accept that because it happened and can't change it anymore. But now what I've learned through that experience is that I had so much strength, or that I've learned a new communication strategy. And so this lesson and these qualities that I've learned through that experience is what going to assist them in the future, and not the pain or the resentment, right? So if they stop at the experience, then they won't be able to distill all the wisdom.
Yeah. What you're describing is that what we see when we reflect back on ourselves is something we might not have been able to see in the moment or in that time. But what it can teach us is that not to panic. In other words, there's always more to life than what we can see. And even when it's a hard time, we can remember that this will change, that there's something to learn here, that there's ways in which tolerance can be something that leads to an outcome that we might not understand in the midst of what's difficult. And it's holding that. That's where appreciation comes in, because when we're holding appreciation as well, then whatever is bad is never as bad. We can get through things and we look back on it and we can see what came from that, how we grew, what we learned. I'm sensing that just by being really aware of adding a valuable aspect to our consciousness, our awareness.
That's also something I usually say to my coaching clients, is that what you experience is here, right? But the experience itself doesn't matter as much as the way you see the experience in your consciousness, right? It doesn't mean that you always have to be grateful, or you always have to push yourself to develop this sense of gratitude toward hardship. It's just that it is more of an invitation for you to look at the painful or the difficult experience with more consciousness, as you said, right? In order to distill the lesson and the value or the quality that you gain from that experience in order to move forward. And then the sense of gratitude will come naturally. Yeah.
I think that's hard to do in the moment sometimes, especially when we're angry or there's a strong feeling about what's happened. But it is good to simply know and be reminded of that this isn't all there is, that you might feel differently later when the urgency or the intensity of this is past.
And it's interesting because what is tricky here is to be able to segment off what we can be grateful for and what we don't have to be grateful for. We mentioned the experience itself, right? And the qualities or values or lessons we learn from the experience. So the things we don't always have to be grateful for, the experience, the hardship. I'm not going to be grateful for the administrative process that my school had, but at the time, I think that's something we need to improve. What I able to be grateful for is the lesson I learned through about administration, how I can handle it in the next exam, or the strain that I have against bureaucracy. So that is what I'm going to be grateful for. And I just think that this is important, because if we are not able to separate what we are craving for, which is values or qualities we develop through the experience, and what we might not have to be craving for, which is the experience itself. We tend to repeat the experience. We tend to repeat the hardship.
Well, I think, again, this is a very important point, because if we're too quick to say, oh, I'm having a bad experience, it must be something I can learn from it, we might be somehow or another enabling abuse, for example. Oh, somebody's abusing me. Well, this is something I can learn from. Well,
No.
actually, I think your point is well stated, that sometimes we have to recognize in the moment what this is and how unfair or how hurtful or how abusive something is, and certainly not be appreciative of it, but not so quickly say, thank you because I'm learning from being abused. That's maybe later in life we can say going through something hard like that has taught me something about myself. But I do think we also have to understand things about what is fair and what is right, and how we can represent ourselves assertively in the face of things that are unfair or not right. Yeah, you're absolutely right to say, no, we don't have to appreciate everything simply because everything has the potential to teach us something. No, we also have to stand up to better ways of living, misuse of power, and these things that are resulting in a lot of the pain that goes on in life.
Yeah, it's important to know that the experience includes something that is wrong, so that we can contribute to improving that condition and making a better life or better society for us and for everyone else. Yeah.
We talked about how it is we become empowered. Well, empowered, part of that is to be able to represent ourselves in the face of things that aren't right, to be assertive and strong and stand for things that are fair. And that's part of what comes out of this as well.
And also this sense of gratitude. I find there are many levels to it, right? Because gratitude is an emotional response. So at the core, it's a state. The emotion isn't there forever, so it's an emotional state. It also can be an act, and if it is cultivated long enough, then it becomes a personal trait that you tend to be able to see the meaning, to see the value of something, and appreciate it. So basically, I think to transform gratitude from a temporary emotion or state into a trait that is beneficial for us, it needs to be practiced.
Yes, sir. I like the way you describe that, and we could almost compare it to a practice. It's almost like how you create a habit. You create it by repeating it effortfully. In other words, consciously decide, I'm going to create this habit. But what happens after 40 repetitions? It becomes less and less effortful, and it becomes something that it becomes a trait. It becomes something that becomes like built into or natural to what we do. And especially when it's so rewarding, we should try to become consciously appreciative of life. Sometimes with my friends, prior to having a meal, we pause long enough to be able to say, thank you. Just taking the time to realize that the depths of the gifts that have been given, that we're living with all the time. So having rituals. Around a meal, just to before we just start eating, we pause and we think about that meal. Where did it come from? Who's touched it? Who's involved in this? So these are ways that we can cultivate our appreciation.
I related that as well. One of the most effective ways to build this practice in our life is to build rituals.
Yes.
Right. So one of my, actually two, my favorite rituals would be to do it at the beginning of the day and at the end of the day. So I keep like a small journal. There is just small page, one page for every month is about gratitude. I only need 30 lines on this page to make it work. It doesn't require too much. And I also don't have to write 5 pages about what I'm grateful for that day. I just need to write one sentence about at least just one thing that I'm grateful for during the day. And that would be enough. And the next day, I would just remind myself of what I wrote the day before. And that's all that I need in order to be rooted in this sense of gratitude and to build it into a personal trait, make it more effortless. Yeah.
Do you ever find some days where you just can't think of anything?
It's strange that I've never had the day where, especially since I'm moving, because I can even be grateful for the birds that are singing. Can you hear that? This is something I don't have in Ho Chi Minh City. And most importantly, as we said earlier, it's also important for us to point with gratitude or appreciation toward ourselves. I find it interesting because I have more gratitude for myself in or about the moments that nobody knows. Everybody can see the work that I display on my social media, for example, but they don't see what's behind the scenes. And no matter how much I can appreciate myself for what I achieve in the front, usually I feel more gratitude for myself about the work that I do in the back. Yeah, that means even more for me. And usually this page that I write in my journal is not about how many clients I have or how many revenue I created for the company, for example, but more about the risk that I take, or even something as simple as being able to, let's say, buy this flower, for example, because I have a history of fear of flowers, which is something really weird. But yes, nobody knows this, and for them,
now everybody knows. But you overcame your fear of buying flowers, and wow, look at what we have here. So beautiful, huh?
Yeah, so I think for me that's a huge step. For others, it doesn't mean anything to them, right? But this is a huge step for me, and these are the things that I would be grateful about myself for, not the big shiny achievements that everyone can see.
Again, that's such a beautiful example of a relationship to yourself and understanding what your fears are, what your limits are, the very personal ways that you are growing and changing and overcoming obstacles. And I like your idea of the journal and making it into a practice and realizing, no, that's not really a problem. I can find something every day. And probably the more you do it, the more you see around you what it is that there is to be thankful for.
I think another beauty of the ritual and all my journal practice is when you do it consistently enough, eventually build a thing in your mind that you would ask yourself, what would I do today in order for me to be grateful about myself at the end? And then you go and do kind things to yourself. And when you're nice and kind to yourself, you tend to do that to others too, right? So it's a very inside-out perspective of growing compassion, I think.
That's a beautiful example. Because it's ultimately about your well-being, you know, and so you're caring for your own well-being. And this is one of the ways that you're doing it. The more we do that, the more we prioritize being okay, feeling good about ourselves, then it feeds on itself, right? More and more we get to the point where, I'm okay. And from there, a lot of potential, you know. If we start with being okay, then who knows?
Yeah. I think it's been a very beautiful conversation, and I hope that is also insightful and meaningful for the audience as well.
Yeah, I forgot about the audience. Anyway, glad to meet you all, and please come back. You know.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much for including me and inviting me to participate.
Yeah, I enjoyed having your presence in the video, and I really appreciate you coming over and improvising enough, because we're recording from my garden. So I hope that you enjoyed this video, and let me know if you have any thoughts about it. See you in the next video.
Yep, bye-bye.